Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya-madhyamam Asmadacharya-paryantam Vande Guru-paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Rameshwara. Good. All right. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome to all of you. And welcome also to all of our students watching online. We continue today our study of chapter 15, Purushottama Yoga, the highest being. And we'll begin with recitation, starting with verse 6. As always, read, as I'm chanting, read the translation, and then repeat after me. Na tad bhasayate suryo, na tad bhasayate suryo, na shashanko na pavakaha, na shashanko na pavakaha, yadgatva nani vartante, yadgatva nani vartante, taddhama paramam mama, taddhama paramam mama. Mamaivaamsho jiva loke, mamaivaamsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatanaha, jiva bhuta sanat. Manashashtanindriyani, manashashtanindriyani, prakritisthani karshati, prakritisthani karshati, shariram yaravapnoti, shariram yaravapnoti, yachapyutkramati shvaraha, yachapyutkramati shvaraha, grahitvaitani sayati, grahitvaitani sayati, Vayurgandhani vashayat, Vayurgandhani vashayat, Shrotrang chakshu sparshanancha, Shrotrang chakshu sparshanancha, Rasanang ghranam evacha, Adhishtaya manaschayam, Adhishtaya manaschayam, Vishayanupasevate, Vishayanupasevate, Utkramantam sthitam vapi, Utkramantam sthitam vapi, Bhunjanam vagunanvitam, Bhunjanam vagunanvitam, Vimudhananupashyanti, Vimudhananupashyanti, Pashyanti jnana chakshushaha, Pashyanti jnana chakshushaha, Yatanto yoginaschainam, Yatanto yoginaschainam, Pashyantyatmanyavastitam, Pashyantiyatmanyavastitam yatantopyakratatmano yatantopyakratatmano nainam pashyantyachetasah nainam pashyantyachetasah. Very good. We finished last class with verse 5, where we had finished our discussion of breaking free from that samsara vriksha, the tree of worldly life. That ashwatha tree is a name that comes in the verse. And in general, trees we find them very beautiful. This is a tree that's a problem. Remember, you get tangled in the web of branches and roots. That's the meaning of the symbolism here. So imagine yourself, and some of you have seen these amazing old trees. So imagine yourself deep inside the tangle of roots and branches and being quite literally trapped, unable to get out. How to get out of that tree of samsara? You need the asanga shastra. You need the weapon of detachment. And the symbolism we saw in great detail in the last class. Just to review it briefly, by the way, all these classes are recorded. If you miss a class, you can watch online and then come back on with us. The symbolism, you remember, is being trapped in the tree of samsara represents the ignorance-based conclusion that the source of happiness is out there. If I work hard enough and smart enough in my life, I can find perfect peace and happiness. You are trapped by that wrong conclusion. So how do you break free from that wrong conclusion? Step 1, Asanga Shastra, detachment. You recognize that the true source of happiness and contentment is not out there. The true source of happiness and contentment is in here. And with that recognition, you use that weapon of detachment to break free from that habitual seeking through extrovert activities. You turn your attention around 180 degrees. It's a radical redirection in our lives so that instead of seeking true happiness and contentment out there, you're seeking it in the right place. Doesn't mean you drop out of daily life. It means you do what you do without that expectation that it will lead you to perfect happiness and contentment. So you turn your attention within, and then with the help of the teachings of Vedanta, you are gradually led to make that discovery. And at the very end of our last class, we said you can only make that discovery within yourself if you are prepared to make that discovery. So if you have done the necessary spiritual practice to become fully prepared, we use the word adhikari in Sanskrit to describe a prepared student. So that prepared student, so step 1 is recognize the impossibility of perfect peace and contentment out there. Step 2, wield that axe of detachment. Step 3, turn your attention around 180 degrees. And step 4, gain the necessary preparation so that these teachings can actually lead you to that discovery. Now, with the next verse, and you see the last line here, Gachanti amudhaha. Amudhaha, those who have become freed from delusion with the help of these teachings, Gachanti, they reach Param avyayam, they reach the supreme state. Sri Krishna will say they reach me. We'll see that. Now we see that the consequence of that discovery is described in this very beautiful next verse. na tad bhasayate suryo, na tad bhasayate suryo, na shashanko na pavakaha, na shashanko na pavakaha, yadgatva na nivartante, yadgatva na nivartante, taddhama paramam mama, taddhama paramam mama. Wonderful symbolism in the first half here. So, tat, it refers to that prior verse, that avyayam param, that supreme state, which means moksha, the acquisition of liberation, ultimate freedom. So, tat, that state of freedom, na bhasayate suryaha. Suryaha, the sun, na tad bhasayate, cannot illumine that end of the road, so to speak. I think we used that metaphor before, a spiritual path leading you within. Usually when you're following a path, you need some light. But here, Sri Krishna says, on this path, the light of the sun won't help you. Na shashankaha, not the light of the moon either. By the way, the Sanskrit here is lovely. Shasha is rabbit. So the one whose anka, mark, is that of the rabbit. Marked with the rabbit is moon. Somehow in Western culture, it's the man in the moon, but here it's the rabbit in the moon. So the light of the sun won't lead you on this path, nor will the light of moon, nor will the light of pavaka, means fire here. So any external light won't help you on this journey because it's a journey within. And further, this is a journey towards the source of a different kind of light, the light of consciousness. Because the ultimate discovery that's made here, and this is the remarkable teaching of Advaita Vedanta, is that the consciousness that is present right now in this ordinary experience, that consciousness is anything but ordinary. That consciousness is Satchidananda Atma. It is unborn, uncreated, boundaryless, limitless. It is utterly unaffected by worldly problems. It is what's generally called the inner divinity. That is the light of consciousness, the light of awareness that you find looking within. And the next, just to give you a little hint at where this discussion is going, that consciousness within you, being all-pervasive, being limitless, is necessarily one. Look at the logic. Can you have two limitless spaces? This space is limitless, that space is limitless. Then, if there are two, there has to be a division between the two. If they're a division, they're not limitless. So that which is undivided, that which is without boundary, is necessarily one. There is one all-pervasive space, which is a metaphor we use again and again for one all-pervasive consciousness. And as we've discussed many, many times, that one all-pervasive consciousness is manifest in every living being. Wherever there is a living being, that consciousness is manifest according to the nature of the being. A plant is a living being, so the consciousness is manifest in the plant according to the nature of the plant, which means very minimally. A cockroach is a living being. Consciousness is manifest in the cockroach, in the dog and cat, in you and me, according to our faculties. So that means we have two perspectives here, and these are two perspectives I want you to hold on to as we move ahead into the next verse. One is a perspective of all-pervasive consciousness, and the other is from your individual perspective. All-pervasive consciousness, we can use the word Paramatma to describe that all-pervasive consciousness. And with regard to the manifestation of that consciousness in you, we can call it Jivatma, the Atma present in the Jiva. So we have this distinction between Paramatma and Jivatma. There are two ways of describing that distinction. One is the sun shining on many buckets of water. One sun, many reflections. The sun is this huge burning ball, but each reflection is a small little disk reflected in the water. So one sun, many reflections. One Paramatma, many Jivatma. But by the way, light of the sun and the light of reflection are both light. Sun is light. The reflection of the sun is light. Light is light, so therefore they're not as different as they seem. The second metaphor, which actually describes it even better, is a difference between all-pervasive space and pot space. Clearly, you can understand what is the space in this pot and compare it to all-pervasive space. And the all-pervasive space, of course, represents Paramatma. The pot space, of course, represents Jivatma. But here it's so clear, if I ask you the question, what's the difference between all-pervasive space and pot space? The difference is arbitrary. The difference is merely due to the presence of this pot. Remember, we called it upadhi. We use that technical Vedantic term, a conditioning adjunct. Pot makes all-pervasive space appear limited, but it's not really limited. In the same way, your body and mind, watch this pot makes all-pervasive space seem limited. Seem. In the same way, your body and mind make all-pervasive consciousness, Paramatma, seem finite, appear to be limited, appear to be stuck inside your body and mind, but it's not really. Space is space. Consciousness is consciousness. Finally, Jivatma is Paramatma. Tattvamasi. That's the ultimate message here. Okay, let us proceed. So, that is the discovery you make, having used that Asanga Shastra to free yourself from the tree of samsara, to use the teachings of Vedanta to turn your attention within and make this discovery of Jivatma. The truth of who you are is not different or separate from Paramatma, the all-pervasive reality. So those who discover it, Sri Krishna says, yad gatva, having gone there to that place. What is that place? That inner place, that truth of who you are, the consciousness. The consciousness which you think is ordinary, and Sri Krishna keeps saying is extraordinary. So those gatva, having taken that path within, not the path outside, but the path within, having gone there, gatva na nivartante. They do not return in two senses. One is having discovered your true nature means removing ignorance, that so-called veil of ignorance that covers your true nature. And we can say this is a joke, not much of a joke, but we'll try it out. There's one good thing about ignorance. What? There's a good thing about ignorance? Yeah. Once you get rid of it, it doesn't come back. So, not much of a joke, I admit. Anyway. Okay. But that's one of the meanings here of nanivartante. It doesn't come back. And in a second sense, once you die, you don't return by means of reincarnation. You don't get born again and are subjected to suffering again. So in both of those senses, nanivartante. They don't return. Yad gatva, having gone where? Having gone to last line tat, having gone there, which is mama paramam dhamma, my supreme abode. Mama paramam dhamma, my supreme abode. So here, Sri Krishna identifies himself with that ultimate reality. And as we've discussed in other classes, Sri Krishna speaks from different perspectives. Sometimes he speaks as Arjuna's charioteer. Sometimes he speaks as the creator and sustainer of the world. Sometimes he speaks from this very lofty, ultimate perspective. So he says here, I am that Paramatma. Now, in this verse, he makes a reference to the fact that those who turn their attention within and discover their true self to be Satchidananda Atma, and they discover that Jivatma, the individual consciousness, is not separate from Paramatma, the all-pervasive consciousness. With this enlightenment, they gain moksha, they are liberated, and therefore they don't get born again. So now Sri Krishna kind of, I won't call it a detour, but he wants to make sure that Sri Krishna, that Arjuna, and all of us really speaking, he wants to make sure that we understand what is that process of reincarnation. In particular, what is that Jivatma? Consciousness connected with a limited individual. And this is more complicated than it seems. But Sri Krishna explains it in a brilliant way. I think you really appreciate it. So let's move ahead and we'll see that right now. So it's a series of 5 verses where he completely explains his whole process of reincarnation, how consciousness comes to be associated with an individual body and mind. He explains, Mamaivaamsho jiva loke, Mamaivaamsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatanaha, jiva bhuta sanatanaha, manashashtanindriyani, manashashtanindriyani, prakritisthani karshati, prakritisthani karshati. So this first line is a little controversial. Mama eva amshaha. An amsha, a portion. Mama eva amshaha, a portion of me. Talking about all-pervasive consciousness. That's when Sri Krishna is talking here. He's talking in the context of Paramatma. So then he's talking as all-pervasive consciousness. So he says, a amsha, a portion of me. Wait a minute. How can all-pervasive consciousness have a part? How can there be such a thing as pot space? There is an apparent pot space, not a real one, but from the standpoint of your experience, there is an independent pot space. In the same way, from the standpoint of your experience right now, you experience yourself as an individual blob of consciousness. How's that? I don't know why blob, but anyway, it works. You are an individual blob of consciousness in terms of experience. But that experience is misleading. Just like to conclude that pot space is separate from space, to conclude that you as a blob of consciousness are independent of all pervasive consciousness is a wrong conclusion. So, when Sri Krishna says, Mama eva amshaha, a part of me. So we can add the word an apparent part of me. Sri Krishna has no parts. I'm not talking about Sri Krishna with 4 arms. He has 4 arms. That's not the, we're not talking from that perspective. Here, Sri Krishna talks as Paramatma, from that perspective, partless. But there is as though parts. And what are those parts? Second line, Jiva Bhutaha. Those are parts which became Jiva, you and me. And what kind of Jiva? Sanatanaha, the eternal Jiva. By the way, eternal Jiva means there was no first birth for the reincarnating individual. That's a common misunderstanding. People say, how did I get born in the first place? Who said there was a first place? We talk about things being cyclic. This is cyclic. There was no first birth. You have had an infinite number of prior lives, and that's what he says here, Sanatanaha. That which is Jiva Bhuta, that which is born as Jiva, is Sanatanaha, it is eternal. And where is it born? Jiva Loke, in this world of people. So the first line, Sri Krishna says, a part of myself got born in this world of people as a Jiva. That's like saying a portion of space got stuck inside this pot. Figuratively stuck inside this pot, not in truth. Or it's like saying the sun is reflected by the pot of water. One sun is reflected by many pots of water, but really speaking, the light of the sun and the light reflected from each pot of water are one and the same light. So here and this is very important, to acknowledge that there is an apparent difference between Jivatma and Paramatma. There is no true difference between Jivatma and Paramatma. As you know, that's a central teaching of Advaita Vedanta. But now we have to understand, how did that all-pervasive consciousness get associated with this body and mind? Well, how did space get stuck inside this pot? And let me ask a rhetorical question and a trick question. What did space do to get stuck inside this pot? You get it, right? It's not anything space did. When we created the pot space came into existence. All-pervasive space was already all-pervasive. We come along and create a pot, and that gives rise to the apparent creation of pot space. In the same way, Paramatma is always all-pervasive consciousness. Then we come along, literally, we, as jivas, as individual beings, just like the pot represents you and me. So we come along, and that's what he says here. Actually, he refers first to the Sukshma Sharira. This is the Sthula Sharira, physical body, but first we're going to talk about the Sukshma Sharira, the non-physical life force and faculties which animate this body, including the mind and including your 5 senses, which is what he says, Manaha Shashta Indriya, Manaha Shashta Shashtani, Manaha Shashtani Indriyani. You have to break the words properly, otherwise you don't get the right meaning. Manaha Shashtani Indriyani, the senses. What are those Indriyani, senses? What are those senses? Manashashtani, the senses which have the mind as number 6. So sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch are 5, plus the mind, which is number 6, which is why we call it antakarana. So sight, etc., are karanas, are sense organs. The mind is the antakarana, the inner sense organ, the sixth sense organ. So this all-pervasive this mind and the five senses, which are prakriti sthani, which are established in nature, parts of nature, your mind and senses, just as your body is a feature of nature, in the same way your mind, just as your stula sharira is a product of nature, in the same way your sukshma sharira is a product of nature. But the significance here is that all-pervasive consciousness gets associated with that mind and senses, the sukshma sharira. And the verb here is a little misleading, karshati. Literally, it attracts. Consciousness attracts a body and mind. It's a figure of speech. Did space attract the pot? No. But space got associated with the pot. So even though karshati literally means attracts, that's what it means, but any good commentary will not hold on to that meaning of attract and will say consciousness gets associated with your sukshma sharira, with your subtle body. By the way, in that pot and water metaphor, that shows something more. This is a great metaphor. But the metaphor of one sun shining on many pots of water shows something else. And what it shows is a distinction between sukshma sharira and stula sharira. The one sun shines on many pots. I don't think pots shine. One sun shines on many pots of water. The pots represent our bodies. The water in the pot represents the sukshma sharira, the mind and senses and prana and everything else. So we see the two different elements identified here. As long as there's water in the pot reflects the sunlight. As long as your sukshma sharira is stuck inside your stula sharira, that's a good thing. Means you're alive. As long as you're alive, consciousness is reflected or manifest. When the pot gets a leak and the water runs out, you've heard my trick question before. Does the sun shine on an empty bucket? Remember that trick question? And the answer, of course, is yeah. But is the sun reflected by an empty bucket? No. That means after death, is consciousness present in a dead body? All pervasive. Is consciousness manifest in that dead body? You get it. So that's why this bucket and water metaphor is very nice. It shows that distinction between stula and sukshma sharira. Right now we're talking about the subtle body, which is represented by the water in the bucket. And here Sri Krishna says that all-pervasive consciousness gets associated with the sukshma sharira and becomes jiva, becomes the individual being. Then, not only a sukshma sharira, but also a stula sharira, we see in the next verse. Shariram yaravapnoti, shariram yaravapnoti, yachapyutkramati shvaraha, yachapyutkramati shvaraha, grahitvaitani sayati, grahitvaitani sayati, vayurgandhani vashayat, Yurgandhani vashayat. Then, so the prior verse had consciousness, all-pervasive consciousness associated with a sukshma sharira. Then, shariram yat avapnoti. Avapnoti, that which gains, it acquires shariram, a physical body. Your sukshma sharira gets associated with an embryo, not embryo, the fetus. Gets associated with the child in the womb. So, and that's where the body begins. So that jiva, which is consciousness associated with a sukshma sharira, it apnoti, acquires shariram, a physical body at the moment of conception, and yatcha api, and also that utkramanti, leaves at the time of death. Who leaves at the time of death? He uses the word Ishvara here, the Lord of the body, so to speak, the Lord of the body, mind, and senses, consciousness, that Jivatma. So Jivatma, here called Ishvara, the Lord of the body, mind, and senses, it acquires a physical body at the moment of conception, and utkramanti, it departs from that physical body at the time of death. And then, having departed from the physical body, then what about the next life? Grahitva, having grasped, having gained, etani sayati. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I've misinterpreted that. So that which leaves the body takes with it, grahitva, that which leaves the body takes with it etani. What are etani? Manashashtani indriyani. It takes along with it the mind and senses. Consciousness endowed with a sukshma sharira leaves the physical body, taking along with it the mind and senses. And Sri Krishna gives us delightful metaphor here. Vayuhu gandhan iva ashayat. Just like Vayu, wind, carries gandhani, fragrances, away from Eva, just like Ashayat. Ashaya is the abode, so flower. So just as wind carries fragrance away from flowers, in the same way, consciousness carries the sukshma sharira away from the physical body. Just a nice metaphor. And when I say consciousness carries away, that's in a figurative sense. Just as space doesn't do anything to get inside this pod or to get out of this pod, in the same way consciousness doesn't actually do anything. It's in a metaphoric sense. So what travels, by the way, let's be clear about that. What travels? What is it that travels from one life to the next is not consciousness. This is a very common misunderstanding. Consciousness cannot travel because it's all pervasive. It's already everywhere. How can it possibly travel? What travels is sukshma sharira. And the metaphor, we talked about this way back in chapter 2. I gave you the example with the bucket of water. Suppose the water leaks out of a bucket, that's death. So now the bucket gets burnt. But suppose we take the water from that bucket and pour it into a little baby bucket. That's a good metaphor for reincarnation. So when you take the water from the old bucket and pour it into the little baby bucket, now a sun is newly shining in that baby bucket. A new sun is manifest in the baby bucket. Did the sun move from the old bucket to the baby bucket? It was the water that moved from the old bucket to the baby bucket. So let's be very clear. Satchidananda Atma does not travel. Sukshma Sharira travels. Of course, that Sukshma Sharira is never separate from consciousness, because consciousness is all-pervasive. Okay, enough said. Next. Shrotrang chakshu sparshanam cha rasanang ghranam eva cha adhishtaya manaschayam vishayanupasevate. That sukshma sharira, after the time of death, cannot experience anything. In order for sukshma sharira to have experience, it requires to be connected with a physical body endowed with organs like shrotram, organ of hearing, chakshus, organ of sight, sparshanam, organ of touch, rasanam, organ of taste, and ghranam, organ of smell. Also, manahacha, also with the organ of the mind. I am this jivatma, adhishtaya, when it's associated with these 6 organs established in a physical body, that jivatma vishayan upasevate experiences vishayan, objects in the world. So the one who, it shows you how complicated things are. Who is the experiencer? Very complicated, surprisingly complicated question. When you eat ice cream, who experiences the ice cream? Is it your tongue? Yes and no. Is it your stomach? Yes and no. Is it your mind? Yes and no. Is it consciousness? Yes and no. It is the aggregate of all these factors that allow you to enjoy ice cream. If you leave any one of those factors out, can you experience ice cream? Without a tongue? Without a stomach? Without a mind? Without consciousness, which is not possible, but you get the point. The one who has experiences is a very complicated thing. That jivatma is a complex entity. Body, mind, senses, and consciousness. You can't leave any one of those factors out. That is a jivatma, that complex entity. And he concludes this idea of traveling. Utkramantam sthitam vapi, utkramantam sthitam vapi, bhunjanam vagunanvitam, vimudhananupashyanti, Pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. So that jivatma that we're talking about, who is jivatma? All-pervasive consciousness associated with an individual sukshma sharira. This is a kind of a baseline definition, and yes, it's a little complicated. I'll say it again. Jivatma can be understood at different levels. In the most fundamental sense, Jivatma is all-pervasive consciousness associated with an individual sukshma sharira, subtle body. That jivatma utkramantam, it travels. Then, having reached your body, sthitam, it remains there. Thank goodness, it remains there. And then, while it remains there, bhunjanam, it experiences. So that jivatma, see now well we say jivatma is present in the body because we understand jivatma independent of the body. Again, jivatma, consciousness associated with an individual subtle body, can travel, utkramantam. It can sthitam, that jivatma can abide in your body, and while that jivatma abides in the body, bhunjanam va. It also enjoys, it experiences things. That jivatma being guna anvitam, being endowed with gunas. We had a long discussion on gunas. Here, guna in a fundamental sense, gunas are the building blocks of nature. So in that sukshma sharira, which is guna anvitam, which is a product of nature, is a proper way to understand it here. So that is the jivatma abiding in this physical body. However, vimudhaha, those who are ignorant, na anupashyanti, they do not recognize that jivatma abiding in a physical body. So those who are deluded, there are different levels of delusion. One is the delusion, in ancient times they call them charvaka, and in modern times we call them medical materialists, those who say that there's no such thing as consciousness. Did you know that? There's no such thing as consciousness. You're not conscious. Go have an argument with those guys. They will do their best to prove to you that there's no such thing as consciousness. But to me, that's like proving to you that there's no pot in my hand. You can torture logic any way you want, but something that's so obvious, to attempt to disprove it using lots of logic is unreasonable. Yet, that's a major theme in philosophy today. It's called medical materialism. They deny the very existence of consciousness. You are a biological machine, a bio-robot. How's that? No such thing as consciousness, according to them. So that's one level of being deluded, vimudha. A more subtle level of being deluded is where we started our discussion, excuse me, and that is to take your consciousness as ordinary. You are this little blob of consciousness. That's also wrong. You would readily agree that you are a conscious being, but that consciousness, just as the space in this pot is not different than all-pervasive space, what you think is a blob of consciousness is actually utterly non-separate from Paramatma, from all-pervasive consciousness. So that's another level of ignorance, another level of delusion. So those who are ignorant do not recognize the presence of that inner truth, jivatma, but jnana chakshushaha, those who, nice expression, Sanskrit is delightful. Those who have chakshus, eyes of knowledge, eyes of wisdom, those with eyes of wisdom, pashyanti, they see. They see. Is that like, if I look at you, can I see? Can I see jivatma in you? Is it like some people think you see auras? By the way, if you see auras, you might be suffering from migraines. You might need to. Sorry. Obviously, I don't go for this aura business. It's kind of this new age stuff, which I think is very poorly founded anyway. So we're not talking about seeing auras. This word pashyanti literally means they see, but it means see in a figurative sense, just like when we say in English, do you see what I mean? So that same metaphor is used in Sanskrit, not surprisingly. So seeing here in a sense of knowing, understanding, recognizing. So those with eyes of wisdom, they recognize that the consciousness manifests not just in me, but the consciousness manifest in you is all pervasive. This is a basis of why we say the inner divinity, the divinity of every person. What is that inner divinity? That inner divinity, divine means what? Not much divine about our bodies. Our bodies are amazing in complexity, but they're, I don't know, after they're dead, they're not very divine, right? They start smelling. So you won't call, the complexity is amazing, but the body decays. So it's not a divinity. Even our mind and senses is so very powerful, but very limited. So you can't call our bodies divine, products of the divine, gifts of the divine. Our mind and senses, powerful, wonderful gifts of the divine, but so flawed and limitless. What about us can possibly be divine? Only that consciousness. That is the divinity. Which, by the way, is the reason we greet each other, namaste. That term, namaste, is Sanskrit for salutations unto you, using the word namaha that we only use to pray to Ishvara. We don't use the word namaha to pray to a person, which means when you greet someone, namaste, you're actually acknowledging that inner divinity. Okay. Last verse we'll see. Yatanto yoginaschainam, yatanto yoginaschainam, pashyantyatmanyavastitam, pashyantyatmanyavastitam, yatanto pyakratatmano, yatanto pyakratatmano, nainam pashyantya chetasaha, nainam pashyantya chetasaha. Yoginaha cha enam. Breaking the words apart. Yoginaha is plural, yogis. And yogi means any spiritual aspirant here. Yogis, spiritual seekers, who are yatantaha, striving to do what? To pashyant. Yogis who are striving, actually we have to connect it to what we saw before, and that was, remember, step one, recognize the impossibility of finding perfect peace and contentment out there. Extricate yourself from the tree of samsara with that axe of detachment. Turn your attention within, but crucially, seek within using the teachings of Vedanta, but when you are fully prepared. We're coming back to that right here. So these yogis are called yogis because they are fully prepared. So having done whatever spiritual practices they need to gain spiritual maturity, and guided by the teachings of Sri Krishna, guided by the teachings of Vedanta, those yogis, yatantaha, striving. What do they see? Pashyanti. We have to break all these words apart. Second line, pashyanti atmani avastitam. Breaking the words. Pashyanti atmani avastitam. They pashyanti. They see. They see what? avastitam, that which abides. And at the end of the first line, enam, cha enam, this one, this jivatma, which is avastitam, which is abiding, we'll say consciousness. Those yogis who are fully prepared through spiritual practice, they pashyanti, they see, meaning they discover, avastitam, established within themselves, they see enam, this consciousness, they discover it where? Atmani, within oneself. Not within Atma, you can't translate it like that, within oneself. Atma is also what grammarians call a reflexive pronoun. Swayam Atmanam, me and myself. So here, Atmani simply means in oneself. So those yogis who are prepared, they strive and they discover that true consciousness within themselves, or to use other words, they discover that what they thought was ordinary consciousness is in fact extraordinary consciousness, all-pervasive consciousness. On the other hand, two sides to every coin, these yogis were prepared. What about those who lack the necessary spiritual preparation? They can still turn their attention within. They can still study the Bhagavad Gita. But if they lack the necessary preparation, what is the consequences? Sri Krishna makes it very clear. And he calls them akrita atmanaha. Grammatically, it's a little complex, breaking the words apart. Api akrita atmanaha. Here atma, interesting, here atma means mind. The prior atma means oneself. Here atma means mind. Sometimes atma means body, and sometimes atma means satchidananda, meaning you have to know the context to know the meaning of any word, especially atma. So here, akrita atmanaha is a complicated expression for one whose mind is akrita. Akrita is shorthand for asamskrita. You know that samskrita means perfected, right? That's what it means. Samskrita as an adjective means perfected. Akrita is shorthand for samskrita. Asamskrita atmanaha, those whose minds are not perfected, those who lack the necessary preparation, the necessary spiritual immaturity. What about them? Yatantaha api, even though they strive. The yogis strived, the yogis were prepared, and they made the discovery of the true self. But these people who are not completely prepared, yatantaha api, even though they strive, na enam pashyanti. Breaking the words apart. Na, they do not pashyanti, see or discover. Enam, the truth of that consciousness. Why? Achetasaha, literally mindless. It means their minds are not prepared. So here Sri Krishna comes full circle back to the topic we saw before we began this discussion about reincarnation. The importance of preparedness, the importance of spiritual maturity. Sri Krishna comes back to it again and again in the Bhagavad Gita. Why? Pretty obvious, right? When a subject matter gets repeated, it's quite deliberate. It's making sure that you recognize this is important. And just to wrap that up, that means what spiritual practices are required for the sake of preparation. First and foremost in the Bhagavad Gita comes karma yoga. Karma yoga means your spiritual practice doesn't stop when you walk out those doors in 10 minutes. Your spiritual practice continues all day long because you are reflecting on the fact that you are always in relationship with Ishvara. Whatever you do, you receive the results of your actions from whom? From Ishvara as karma phala data. To have that alertness throughout the day is karma yoga. This is a 1-minute explanation of karma yoga. Karma yoga is to be alert throughout the day that you are constantly in relationship with Ishvara, Ishvara who is karma paladata, the one giving you the fruits of all of your actions. So karma yoga is primary in the Bhagavad Gita. So is other important practices. We had a whole chapter dedicated to dhyana, meditation. Several chapters dedicated to bhakti, devotion. So these practices are all necessary to prepare you. When you are adequately prepared, remember I think at the very end of the last class, I gave that metaphor, trying to light the pile of wet wood. You keep lighting match after match after match. When the wood is sufficiently dry, it ignites. When you are sufficiently prepared, you will discover this truth that Sri Krishna is teaching here, the truth of your own true divine nature. And it is discovered effortlessly when you're prepared. Notice Sri Krishna makes the comparison here. So the yogis strive and they make the discovery. The unprepared ones, no matter how hard they strive, it's not a matter of effort. It's a matter of preparedness. Okay, enough. Okay, announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Vedanta class, Upadesha Sastra. It's a brilliant text of Sri Shankaracharya at 10 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, we have satsang immediately following, so please join us for classes tomorrow. And we'll conclude now with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Havamahe Kaving Gavhinamupamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shranvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kam Sachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Duhka Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.